Evening settled over the small frontier town of Dry Creek like a weary sigh. Dust drifted through the streetlight haze, carrying the smell of whiskey, sweat, and horsehair. Outside the Silver Lantern Saloon, laughter spilled through the swinging doors as the piano clanged in the corner. And there, at the hitching post, stood Jonas Reed, hat low, coat unbuttoned, bottle loose in hand, murmuring to his gray mare Whisper. He'd been a fixture in Dry Creek for years now. The man who used to train horses for the army, who once owned half the Reed ranch out by Copper Ridge, until drought, fever, and grief hollowed him out. His wife, Clara, was buried beneath the cottonwoods near the north fence line. After she died, he turned to drink like a man falling down a well. The town pitied him, then grew tired of pity. Now they mostly laughed. Old Jonas'll talk that nag to death before he rides her. One cowboy jeered from the saloon porch. Jonas only tipped his hat. Whisper's ear flicked, and he rubbed her neck, whispering, "Easy, girl. They ain't mayonine much." She was all bone and stubbornness now. A faded gray mare with scars around the girth line and a milky left eye. But when Jonas looked at her, something in his gaze turned soft, as if the world still held one pure thing left unbroken. At sunset, Jonas led Whisper to the water trough. Children giggled nearby, pointing at the wobble in his step. A woman selling bread shook her head. "He's talking to that horse again. Poor fool." Jonas never answered the town's judgment. He carried their laughter like a stone in his pocket. Heavy, familiar, almost comforting. In the evenings he'd sit by the livery fire, cleaning Whisper's hooves with slow reverence, speaking in half-remembered lines of poetry Clara once read aloud. No one noticed the rhythm in his hands, the quiet patience in his touch. No one remembered that this so-called fool had broken the wildest stallions on the Western Trail. But that night, the sheriff's boy, Tommy, came running into the saloon shouting about a fire out by the freight yard. Old stables caught in the wind. Men rushed for buckets. Jonas followed, bottle dropping from his grip. Whisper's ears pricked. She could smell the smoke. When they reached the yard, flames rolled through the timber pens. Horses screamed behind the smoke. The men hesitated. The gates were jammed, the wind savage. Jonas didn't wait. He tore off his coat, wrapped it over his mouth, and pushed through. He cut the ropes, led 3 panicked horses toward the open. Whisper trotted in after him, nipping and nudging the frightened animals towards safety, as if remembering old lessons. When the fire settled, Jonas stood blackened with soot, hands shaking, but alive. Nobody laughed that night. Still, by morning, gossip had dulled the gratitude. "Lucky fool," someone muttered, drunk enough not to feel the heat. Jonas only smiled. Whisper grazed quietly by the trough, her tail flicking smoke ash from the night before. A week later, a traveling show rode into Dry Creek. The Langley Horse Exhibition, banners boasting trick riding, wild stallions, gold prize. The whole town buzzed. Even the sheriff took a half day to see it. Jonas leaned against the fence outside the corral, hat pulled low. He hadn't meant to come, but Whisper's hoof had thrown a shoe near the fairground. He was hammering a replacement when he heard the crowd roar. At the center of the arena stood a massive black stallion, fire in its eyes. The handler shouted that no man had yet ridden him. $10 and a bottle of whiskey for whoever could stay on for a full minute. Men tried, one after another, thrown like rags into the dust. The stallion reared, screaming, ropes snapping in the air. "Any more brave souls?" the handler barked. Someone laughed. "Let Jonas Reed try. He's already half drunk. Maybe the beast won't notice." The crowd roared with laughter. Even the handler smirked. Jonas's jaw flexed. Whisper turned her head toward him, the cloudy eye catching a glint of sun. He stepped forward, voice low. "What's the harm in an old fool's try?" Gasps rippled through the stands. The handler shrugged. "You fall, old man. You break your neck. But sure, Let's give the folks a show. Jonas stroked Whisper's neck. Wait here, girl. Then he stepped into the corral. The black stallion lunged, nostrils flaring. Jonas moved slow, every step measured. He didn't fight the horse's rage. He listened to it. Watched the way its shoulders tightened before it struck, how fear disguised itself as fury. He murmured the same words he'd once whispered to Whisper when she was wild and uncatchable. You ain't bad. Just scared. I know that kind of scared. Minutes passed. The crowd grew restless. Then, without warning, Jonas slipped the rope over the stallion's neck, swung up in one clean motion, and held. For 60 breathless seconds, he stayed, body loose, balanced like water on stone. When the stallion finally stilled, foam darkening its chest, Jonas dismounted and stroked its nose. Silence. Then thunderous applause. The handler gaped. Where'd you learn that? Jonas smiled faintly. From a horse that taught me to listen. He glanced at Whisper. And from a woman who taught me patience. The crowd cheered his name for the first time in years. Children ran to touch Whisper's mane. The black stallion followed Jonas to the fence, calm as a colt. That night, the saloon offered him free whiskey, but Jonas only asked for water. When the barkeep raised an eyebrow, Jonas said quietly, I had my last drink the night she burned, nodding toward the freight yard. No one laughed after that. Days passed. The Langley show prepared to leave town, but Jonas lingered in people's conversations now. Half admiration, half guilt. The sheriff's wife brought him a loaf of bread. The blacksmith offered a real job, training horses again. Jonas thanked them all, though his eyes carried something far away. At dusk, under the cottonwoods, he visited Clara's grave. Whisper grazed nearby. Jonas sat cross-legged and opened an old letter, the paper worn thin from years of folding. Clara's handwriting wavered in the lantern light. If you ever forget who you are, find a horse that still trusts you. They'll remind you how to live again. He smiled faintly, tears mixing with dust. Guess I found her, Clara. He spent that night mending Whisper's saddle and brushing her coat until it gleamed silver in the moonlight. The next morning, posters went up for the county race. A long, brutal run across Copper Ridge, 20 miles through dust and wind. The prize, a new ranch horse and enough coin to start fresh. The men in town joked again. That old mare won't make it past the river. Jonas only nodded. Maybe, but she deserves one last run. Whisper seemed to sense it. The way she leaned against him at dawn, ears forward, the faint tremor of excitement in her stance. She wasn't strong like the others, but her heart was pure steel. When the race began, dust exploded under hooves. Riders surged ahead, shouting. Jonas held Whisper steady, whispering to her rhythm. They moved like one shadow. At the halfway mark, thunder rolled. A storm gathered over the ridge. Most men slowed. Jonas pressed on. Rain slashed his face. Mud swallowed the path. One rider fell. Another's horse refused the incline. Whisper stumbled once, but caught herself. Jonas leaned low, murmuring, just like old times, girl. One more mile. As they crested the ridge, lightning split the sky. For a moment, Clara's words echoed in the wind. They'll remind you how to live again. Whisper's stride lengthened. The finish post appeared through the rain. Jonas could hear the crowd below, faint but rising. They crossed the line not first, but upright, mud-splattered, trembling unbroken. The cheers that followed weren't for victory, but for endurance. Jonas dismounted slowly, kneeling beside Whisper, pressing his forehead to hers. You did good, girl. You did good. Word of Jonas Reed spread beyond Dry Creek. Folks said he tamed a wild stallion and outridden men half his age. But Jonas didn't chase the glory. He rebuilt the old Reed stable, took in strays, taught the sheriff's boy how to ride gentle. Whisper grew slower, her coat paler, but her eyes stayed bright. Then one spring morning, the town gathered for the Founders' Fair. Children raced ponies, music played, and a new mayor, a proud man named Carter, offered to host a display of horsemanship in honor of Dry Creek's revival. He invited Jonas to open it. "They'd love to see the man who proved us wrong," he said. Jonas hesitated, then nodded. By afternoon, the corral was ringed with people. Old rivals, children, even the men who once mocked him outside the saloon. Whisper stood saddled, silver mane catching sunlight like frost. Jonas mounted quietly, tipped his hat to the crowd, and guided her into the ring. No tricks, no showmanship, just the slow, graceful dance of trust. He moved her through soft circles, reins loose, body relaxed. She followed every breath, every shift of weight. The world went silent except for hoofbeats in dust. Then, without cue, Whisper stopped before the grandstand. Jonas dismounted and removed his hat. "She's done her part," he said softly. "Now it's time I let her rest." He slipped the saddle free, set it down, and led her toward the open gate. The crowd didn't understand, until Jonas unclipped the rope and whispered, "Go on, girl." Whisper paused, looked back once, and trotted out toward the wide hills, mane rippling in the wind. Silence fell. Some wept quietly. Jonas turned to the crowd. "A fool holds on to what's already free. I was that fool once. Not anymore." The mayor stepped forward, speechless. A little boy, Tommy, ran to Jonas and hugged his leg. "She'll come back, won't she?" Jonas smiled. "Maybe not, but that's all right." As the sun dipped low, Whisper's gray shape faded into the horizon. Jonas stood alone, but lighter than he'd been in years. That night, townsfolk left bread, candles, and notes outside his stable door. One reads simply, "Thank you for reminding us what grace looks like." He tacked it beside Clara's letter. Then he sat by the window, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, a horse ran free, carrying the ghost of every kindness he'd almost forgotten. Weeks later, a young ranch hand spotted a gray mare grazing near Copper Ridge, coat shining in the sun. She looked up at the rider, unafraid, before vanishing into the wild hills. When the story reached town, Jonas just smiled. "Good girl," he whispered. The people of Dry Creek never laughed at him again. They said the drunk who talked to his horse had taught them all something about loyalty and love that outlives loss. If this story touched you, the narrator's voice would fade. Subscribe, share, or tell us where you're watching from. These stories matter.